So the video stopped because my phone ran out of space. So here's video part 2. I'm absolutely not wanting to rehash all the autopsy results again. So I'm just going to pick up right where I left off and let's just pretend this is all one video, okay? So I just, in the other video, I think finished talking about fetal placental weight ratios. And then the next line here, this is key, he says the cause of death is unknown. With possible causative or contributing factor of cord compression secondary to tight nuchal cord. Not to beat a dead horse here, but we don't think there was a tight nuchal cord. That's according to my midwife who delivered him. The small placenta suggests also the possibility of placental insufficiency as a contributing cause. And when I read that, I was like, oh, placental insufficiency, maybe that's related to the small placenta. But when you, and that could be, but when you Google Scholar search placental insufficiency, you get a lot of stuff on intrauterine growth restriction, which was not the case here. He was not growth restricted. Elijah was 8 pounds, 13 ounces. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that. And I asked Dr. Kleiman that later. One caveat to the latter is that the placenta in this case is somewhat less involuted than the fetus microscopically, and this is important, suggesting the possibility that we reviewed the wrong placenta. Clinical correlation is suggested for the latter. So in other words, he saw big baby, small placenta and was like, that doesn't make sense. Maybe we reviewed the wrong placenta. I didn't know what to make of that at the time. I remember in the meeting with the pathologist asking that, you know, saying that bothers me. I want to know if you reviewed the right placenta. And he said, basically, you know, don't worry about it. It's probably the right placenta, but we noticed this discrepancy. And so just the, you know, good scientific writing requires us to say, well, maybe we mixed this up because we see something that doesn't make any sense. And I disagree, and I'm glad he felt the freedom to say that maybe something got mixed up, because that's good. If he has doubts, he should say that. But in my scientific background, if you think there's a mix-up, then you need to go back and try to find out what happened, or did it get mixed up, or do testing to see if it got mixed up, and you don't just leave it at maybe it got mixed up shrugs. Like, you go back and try to find out if it did get mixed up, or how that might have happened, or like that's just a starting point for asking questions. You would never, in my mind, end with maybe it got mixed up, end of story. So at the end of this meeting with the pathologist, I was like all this frustration building up, and I just started crying at the end of the meeting. And I didn't have a way to articulate why I was crying, but I know the people there said, it's okay, Anne, I know this is hard, it's not your fault. And I remember thinking, I'm not crying because I think this is my fault. I'm not crying because I think this is anybody's fault. I'm crying because I have all these questions. You know, what about the error in tight nuchal cord? What about the less than 10th percentile weight? I want to know more about that. What about the ultrasound photos? Can we look at the ultrasound photos and see if he had a small placenta? They said no. What about the mixed up placenta? Can we find out if the placenta was mixed up? And they said, sorry, we can't do anything. And so that's why I was crying. That is why I was crying. I was so frustrated. I couldn't articulate that right in the moment at the time. It took me a few days to sort of digest that, but that's where I was left hanging, was all these it felt like they left this this trail of breadcrumbs of really interesting questions that could be answered, but I was treated sort of as this stereotypical bereaved mother of like, pat me on the head, tell me it's okay, there's nothing you could have done, where it's like, I think I have really valid questions here that deserve a discussion, and I understand you don't know everything and we might not come to any answers, but I also don't think you should blow me off when I'm like, oh hey, let's find out some more about XYZ. So anyway, I was all kinds of frustrated, angsty, and I was not crying because I thought it was my fault, but that's what they thought. Anyway, fast forward, hear Dr. Kleiman's podcast. I really should try and get a link to that somehow here. I will try to figure that out, to Dr. Kleiman's podcast. And I think you'll see, if you happen to listen to that, why, like, it was so many aha moments going off when I listened to the podcast. Anyway, we got Dr. Kleiman's report back. The autopsy meeting was in mid-October-ish, and we got Dr. Kleiman's report back in late December, right after Christmas. So, a little over 2 months. And so Dr. Kleiman's report is written to my care providers, but he says right here, I'm reading part of his interpretation. The whole thing is really long, but here's the key passages. This unfortunate term, IUFD, or intrauterine fetal demise, placenta was very small, weighing less than the first percentile for gestational age. Boom, first sentence is one of the questions that I had after the pathology meeting. The fetal placental ratio at birth was 10.1 to 1, which is very much in the imminent IUFD range. Again, that was one of my questions from the autopsy meeting of like, well, greater than 97th percentile, what does that mean? Well, Dr. Kleiman interprets that very clearly here. He goes on to talk about potential causes, just like they did in your Elijah's report. And Dr. Kleiman's suspicion is that perhaps there was a genetic abnormality where, as part of that, like the communication between the fetus size and the placenta size, something just wasn't working well in that communication. So had he been born alive, we may never have known about this genetic abnormality. It may never manifested itself in a way where we would have observed anything, or maybe we would have. We don't really know. But that was his suspicion after ruling out some other possible causes of small placenta. A further complication was the presence of a long umbilical cord, reported at 81 centimeters, attached to the placenta, and a nuchal cord. The pathology report stated this was tight, but the family stated it was easily reduced. Therefore, this is likely not a factor in this loss, and the small placenta was likely the major factor. Examination of ultrasounds between 20 and 40 weeks revealed that the estimated placental volume, EPV, went from the 41st percentile to the 0.2 percentile. Clearly, any future pregnancies will need to be followed with serial EPVs starting at 20 weeks. Of note, immunohistochemistry for blood group A antigen confirmed that the maternal and fetal blood types were both A, consistent with both parents' A blood types. So in other words, I asked Dr. Kleiman, we don't know if this is the right placenta, can you please figure that out? And he checked the blood types, and that all matched up. And the ultrasound pictures that Dr. Kleiman also matched up with what he saw for the size of the placenta that was mailed to Yale. So he is very confident that he was reviewing the correct placenta. Then he says, please contact me if you wish to discuss the results in more detail. I would also be happy to meet the family if they wish to discuss these results with me further. So we definitely took Dr. Kleiman up on that offer to discuss the results with him, and we've had multiple meetings with him, both of which were over 2 hours long, I think. And I could just probably ask him questions all day long about this. I was so interested to learn about, not only about, our Elijah and just about why he died and what research is being done on this, but what it means for any future pregnancies, if there are any, and what he's doing to get his research out there. And it was really, really fascinating. So that's the autopsy reports. Yeah, I don't even know exactly what else to say, but 2 very different autopsy reports. So yeah, what else about your video? I'm trying to remember. I'm looking at my notes here. Oh, you talked about driving around the area where the taxi ride was between, like, not hearing your Elijah's heartbeat and going to the hospital for the more official diagnosis. And it made me wonder, how did you decide you were ready to go back to that area where you felt like, okay, this is an area that you had avoided, and then how did you decide, okay, now I'm ready? Was it just sort of a gut instinct, or did you ask yourself a certain sort of set of questions? And I was also wondering if there are other stories like that of other triggers where you had to sort of, or other events where you had to sort of force yourself to overcome them. I wondered if you'd be willing to share some of those stories. I've conquered many of those things, but I still have many left to conquer. Sometimes I refer to them as my triggers. Like one unsurprising one would be like very pregnant women. I just want to walk up to them and ask them if they've checked their baby's placenta size, and the answer is most likely no. And that would be completely socially not cool and all kinds of anxiety inducing for them maybe, and not a good way to manifest my grief. So that's kind of a trigger for me. Another maybe less obvious trigger, one day it was my first time back at Target, where I finally could sort of make it out the door and go do grocery shopping. And I remember walking by the aisle of children's backpacks, and the only thought that crossed my brain was, oh, those children's backpacks, those are for the kids who survive. And so now every time I walk by the kids' backpacks at Target, I think, oh, those are for the surviving kids. Those are for the ones who died. They don't get them. So there's something about children's backpacks at Target where I don't know, not that I really try to avoid them, but they definitely sort of give me that anxiety, I guess. Not severe, it's not debilitating, it's just kind of makes me stop and pause. But I have other things that I kind of refer to as my rock pile, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Like the Baker Square video that I posted, that was very much one of my rock pile moments, where it's like I have these things that to like fully reintegrate and function in society, like I really just have to conquer them, which means like I move them from one pile into my, like, I'm really scared to do this but haven't done it yet, and then once I do it I can move it into my done, accomplished rock pile. So it's more like one-time things. Like now that I've gone to Baker Square and I told the employees that Elijah died, like that's done, they know, and it's better now. But yeah, I was trying to the other rock pile things, just showing up anywhere for kind of the first time at different, groups of friends, or at church, or at just different places. Like going there the first time can sometimes feel like I'm moving one of the rocks in my rock pile. And it's work to do that. It's like emotional work. But once the work is done, the work is mostly done. Part of the reason why I share this is because it's like the big rock moving thing that I need to do next is talking with my OB, who supervises the midwives that I saw. Right now, she was sent Dr. Kleiman's report, but hasn't responded, and she has not talked with Dr. Kleiman. She hasn't responded to me at all, so I don't know if she read the report. I don't know if it's of interest to her. I hope it is. I have no idea if it is or not. I really want her to know what Dr. Kleiman said and what he learned, and I want her to know why Elijah died. So it's a really common question I get from friends who who know my story and our story, like, does your OB know what happened? And I just have to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, but I want her to know. And so I would like to go set up a meeting with her, but the thought of that absolutely freaks me out. That is very firmly in my not yet moved rock pile. So I'll get to that someday, but that's sort of behind my question for you about, like, how did you know when you were ready to tackle some of these things? I'm curious. That sort of, just asking you that question sort of got me thinking about how I have been so blessed by families who have gone through stillbirth before us, and in them sharing their stories and in sharing their grief with us, it brought me back to remember our friend Leah. She had a full-term stillbirth roughly 8 or 9 years ago, and her son's name is Joseph. And one of the things I remember so clearly of Leah sharing her story with us back in, so many years ago, was she said she was so glad that she took photos of her son after he was stillborn. Because I remember thinking, how would you know if you decided to, how would you know if you wanted to do that or not? And so when we found out Elijah was no longer alive, I was in labor with him, and the nurses asked, oh, do you know if you'd like to take photos of your son? And I only had to think for like 3 seconds, and I thought of Leah. I remember Leah saying, I'm so glad I took photos. And so for us, we didn't wrestle with that like Leah did. And I was so grateful. She shared her story with us. She shared these pictures of Joseph with us. I will never forget seeing photos of little Joseph. And yeah, her sharing that with us made a huge difference in our story. So anyway, back to one of the motivating factors. These stories need to be told, and so here's us doing our thing. So yeah, I feel like I just rambled there for a bit, but I feel like I have a lot to learn from you, though, in that you're a year ahead of me, and I think just kind of maybe in a slightly different place. Maybe a few more of your rocks have been moved. And so I'm curious for any of your inputs on that. So you've been going for kind of a while, so I'm going to wrap this up kind of quickly, maybe. But I did want to share about Timothy in camp, and we wrestled with such a similar question. When we found out Elijah had died, Timothy was off at camp, and we thought, what do we do? Do we bring him home? Do we let him finish? Well, we didn't know when Elijah was going to be born, and I remember that just being one of the hardest questions of how do we bring our children into this or not, and what does that look like? And like you, the nurses were like, it's totally, individual choice, and there's no right or wrong answer. And among a million other hard questions that we were like, please help, give us some advice. A few factors for us. All of our children saw Elijah. One thing is that Timothy's camp ended on Tuesday morning, and so some friends picked him up from camp and drove him to the hospital. And amazing. So we told them about Elijah's stillbirth, and they had to just keep that inside and not tell Timothy, because we wanted to be the ones to tell Timothy. So that would be hard. Anyway, Timothy came home that morning, and we were still at the hospital with Elijah. So it would have been hard to not have Timothy there. He would have asked, and then somebody besides mom and dad would have had to have told him, why are mom and dad at the hospital and I can't be there? So Timothy and our younger two living children did come to the hospital and see Elijah. Overall, I think that was a good decision for us. Oh, and the other reason, a lady, Kelly, from a ministry called Halos, who comes alongside families who are like going through a stillbirth, she also said she had her living children come to the hospital and visit their stillborn son. And so it was almost like, okay, Kelly did it, so I guess we're going to do it. It was like not even a whole lot more thought than that, because I just wasn't in a place to be thinking, what are the long-term pros and cons? I'm just like, okay, she did it, so we'll do it. It's like one valid option. If one other person has done it, you're not the first. That's boom, done. So we did have them. So sometime I can show the stories of what that was like for our children, and there are things about it that were, I think in hindsight, really good, and there are other things that I wonder what kind of trauma markings that will have on them for the rest of their life. And I don't know, they're going to kids counseling right now, and we talk about Elijah all the time, but they're working through their grief in the many ways that it's manifested itself in them. And so, some other time when I'm not going so long, I will share about their experiences in the hospital as best as I can remember. But it wasn't a clear-cut decision for us, and as of right now, I'm okay with how it unfolded, but I wouldn't say that it was an easy. I'm not like confident we did the right thing or anything. I do want to ask you if you've been to the Placenta clinic yet, because like you said, I'm going to hold you accountable, and I really want to know how that meeting either went, or if you're planning on it. I'd be curious about that. And any rock pile stories you have, or triggers, or how you knew when you were ready to sort of overcome the ones that you had some control over, when to overcome them. And I loved hearing your doula stories, just the redemptive aspect of them, and I'm just glad that you could see that there was redemption. And then the daughter, was it Alina, named after your son? That is so beautiful. Oh, that is so beautiful. And I'm glad that there's some redemption. I'd love to hear how your doula, are there special classes for bereavement doulas, or what does that training look like, or how is it different? Obviously, a baby who's not alive. I just wonder, is that like an organized, super organized thing? Do people request specific bereavement doulas? But obviously, there's not a huge amount of time between like learning your baby died and then needing a special bereavement doula. So I'm curious how that works. It made me wonder if we have bereavement doulas in our area. Oh, and your story about taking the picture of the placenta, and then now you are such a birth nerd to even think at the time, oh, take a picture of Elijah's placenta. That did not cross my brain. So you are in a different category of birthing nerdiness. Way to go. And I'm actually a little bit opposite in that I didn't think at the time to take a picture of Elijah's placenta, but now I actually really would like one. I want to put it above my desk as just sort of this motivating factor to get the word out there, like, hey, everybody, placenta size really matters. For any size baby, it's small placenta just on its own, independent of fetal size, is a risk factor for stillbirth. And so I feel like having Elijah's placenta above my desk would just be that constant reminder of the importance of placental size and how both of us very much wish that it was not overlooked. So anyway, thank you, Becca. I enjoy our conversations, and sorry this video is in 2 parts. I will see if I can get my video in 1 part next time. Talk to you later.